melatonin is by far the best supplement and treatment for Alzheimer's disease. At least that's what the dozens of clinical trials show, and the hundreds upon hundreds of other studies where they get into the biochemistry. And I'll talk about the results of those in a moment. But first of all, understanding that Alzheimer's is increasing in numbers. It's now considered the 5th cause of death in the US. It was the 6th and it was the 7th, but it's continuing to increase. One, because we're aging, but two, we're seeing increases in Alzheimer's in every age category. So 3% of people between 65 and 75 develop Alzheimer's, 12% between 75 and 84 years of age develop Alzheimer's, and 32% over 85 years of age develop Alzheimer's. And it's not just the condition itself that's of concern, but the extended period at which people may be looking after you, or you may be having difficulty with Alzheimer's. That is the real concern. And these are underestimated because, as we saw in times like COVID, that the Alzheimer's disease patients were classified as COVID deaths and other virus deaths and so on. So these are underestimated. But what we do know is the rates are going up. Now, if you're wondering about Alzheimer's, the first thing you've got to assess is, how does it relate to all these other conditions and diseases that we've got out there? And what we see is there's a whole raft of comorbidities. Now, these are the other conditions that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. And highlight that, again, all these diseases are related through inflammation, oxidation, and go through that in a moment. But it's not one condition, it's a part of others. So if you've got, for example, sleep difficulties, then you are at much higher risk. Yes, sleep difficulties, which of course links it directly back to melatonin, because melatonin is the sleep hormone. And then we go sleep, diabetes. Alzheimer's is often called diabetes type 3 because of such close association with it. Then you've got cardiovascular disease, particularly hypertension, stroke, and atherosclerosis, which is the blocking of the arteries, and as well as gastrointestinal problems and osteoporosis, thinning of the bones. So first of all, you might say, well, hold on, how come all those conditions are linked? And there's lots more. These are just the top ones. And it shows that the underlying conditions aren't just to do with Alzheimer's, they're to do with all of these chronic illnesses. And then we say, okay, what are the theories behind it? What do we think is causing Alzheimer's? And it starts off at neuroinflammation, inflammation in the brain. Now, inflammation is the cornerstone of all chronic illness. So we know neuroinflammation is occurring, and so we would like to take steps to reduce that inflammation. Now, the great thing is melatonin has a dramatic role in decreasing neuroinflammation. We also know that there's oxidation. So we've got both oxidation and inflammation as the cornerstones of Alzheimer's disease. And what's fantastic is we know that melatonin is one of the most potent antioxidants, twice as potent as vitamin E. But what it does is it actually coordinates the other internal, what we call endogenous antioxidants like glutathione and superoxide dismutase, and it coordinates those to kick in and start working too. So we're not just getting the effect, the direct effect of melatonin, but the indirect effect on other enzyme systems in the body that are antioxidant. So lots and lots of benefits there. And then we see that beta amyloid plaque. And beta amyloid plaque has been known for a long time. It's basically proteins that form in the brain, in the normal brain, but they're cleared out and got rid of out of the brain. And the Alzheimer's brain is the one where it continues to accumulate, and it causes literally blockages, physical, biochemical blockages, and as a result, Alzheimer's disease. So these beta amyloid plaques are characteristic of it. And what we find is melatonin is associated with the whole beta amyloid plaque processing of it. So it slows it down, and it increases the rate at which it is also eliminated. So it slows the production of it down and increases the rate at which it is eliminated out of the brain. Wow, isn't that fantastic? And you can see that literally melatonin has benefits on all of these areas. Then you've got these other, they're proteins, and you've got these tau proteins. And these, again, are a normal part of the brain functioning, but you end up with what's called hyperphosphorylation. And essentially, melatonin helps regulate the phosphorylation. So it slows it down and helps eliminate any of the issues or damage that's caused by it. So melatonin has a direct impact on this level as well. Now, the next level is mitochondrial dysfunction. And mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cells. Now, in the brain, it is a highly energetic neurons, cells. They require a heap of energy. When I first went through my studies decades ago, I was told that the brain uses about the equivalent of a peanut's worth of energy. Well, we know that's exactly wrong. It's much more like a whole packet of peanuts worth of energy used in the brain. So it's energy dependent, which means it needs the powerhouse, the energy production, which is the mitochondria. So anything's going to go wrong with that, then it goes wrong with the brain, our focus, our thinking, our concentration, and of course, mental health issues, long-term neurological issues, and so on. And the melatonin is critical for healthy mitochondrial function. In fact, all of the research clearly shows that it helps mitochondrial function. It sets up something called autophagy, which is the cleaning out of the cells, and mitophagy, and it coordinates those, which is the cleaning out of the mitochondria. So it's getting rid of all the debris and the dead bits and pieces that are hanging around. So it allows the mitochondria to function at its maximum capacity. Now, that happens in all our cells now that we know, but it happens more up here, hence why we're more prone to damage, because of the importance of energy in the brain. So we've got this mitochondrial dysfunction, and melatonin reverses. Insulin dysregulation, again, one of the reasons, or one of the factors I've already mentioned, the close association between diabetes type 2 in particular and Alzheimer's disease. Insulin dysregulation in diabetes type 2, insulin resistance, insulin production, and melatonin goes back to reverse all of those conditions. Melatonin is critical for the production of insulin, and or if insulin resistance develops. It opens up the pathways in the cell, what's called the GLUT4 receptors, and allows the glucose, the sugar, to get out of the blood and into the muscle cells where they can do the work. So very important for insulin, calcium homeostasis, and the last one is circadian and cellular cycles. This is one of the latest theories about Alzheimer's, and they find that the cell cycles, things like the division of the cell, the growing of the cell, the reproduction of the cell, and ultimately the death of the cell, is coordinated via melatonin, which is one of the major coordinating molecules. In fact, what we do know about melatonin is, first of all, it's a circadian rhythm, which is your daily 24-hour cycle, but it links in with virtually all of the coordination of times throughout our whole body. Our digestive system timing runs not just 24 hours, but shorter, longer, even in terms of female menstrual cycles and the onset of female menstrual cycles. All of this is at least in part, if not totally, controlled by melatonin. So we see melatonin has this huge role to play in all these cycles. And if we go back to it, melatonin plays a major role in solution of all these. So we can see from the theories behind it that melatonin has all this multi-layered effect on reducing all of the possibilities, all the factors that may be contributing. But then we see that obviously melatonin is known as the sleep neurotransmitter, or the sleep hormone. It's much, much more than that. We produce about 5% or less of melatonin in the pineal gland, whereas really the rest of the body produces it as a way of protecting us and coordinating all these biochemical processes through the body. It's so important. We know that melatonin has a reversing effect on diabetes type 2. It has a huge benefit on insulin regulation and other factors, diabetes type 2, that I've already mentioned, cardiovascular disease, including hypertension, stroke, and atherosclerosis. It helps in all of those conditions, and as well as gastrointestinal. And it's shown without any doubt. So I'll come back here. Gastrointestinal. Melatonin is produced in the gut, so the gut lining. And one of the reasons it's produced in the gut, one, because of its antioxidant properties, but it also helps coordinate all the movement through the gut. So it speeds up the movement through the stomach, it slows it down during that part, speeds it up over there. And so it has a really important role to play in regulation of all the movement going through the gut, not to mention the benefit it has on the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome has a real huge play in Alzheimer's disease, but we also know melatonin has a huge benefit on the gut microbiome. So it's a win-win-win situation. And then osteoporosis. I've already put up a lot of information on my videos, the role of melatonin in preventing and treating osteoporosis. It, again, like this, plays a major role in the regulation of putting the calcium on the bone and recycling the calcium so more goes on the bone than off the bone. So we see that melatonin has a big impact on all of the comorbidities, and we can see it plays a major role here. Without any doubt whatsoever, melatonin as a supplement has been shown to have dramatic positive effects that often outweigh those of the pharmaceuticals that are used in Alzheimer's disease. Melatonin is probably in every cell in the body. The more metabolic activity of the cells, for example, the neurons in the brain and the nervous system or muscles, the greater the level of mitochondria and the greater the level of melatonin that your body produces, as long as it's got the building blocks. So we've got it in muscle, we've also got it in brown fat that people probably aren't aware of yet, that is metabolically active fat, and something we'll do a video on so you can learn about that, how good it is for you. So it's primarily in the mitochondria, because the mitochondria is where all the metabolism is going on, the production of free radicals that escape in that production of energy, and it's the first port of call, and hence why it has so many antioxidant properties and anti-inflammatory properties, because it's getting right into the cell, but also throughout the cells and other parts of the body. We also find where everybody probably knows where it's occurred, because this is what we've known for the last 80 years or so, is in the pineal gland. And we produce a small amount at night based on our diet, our lifestyle, and a whole raft of other factors. Unfortunately, 21st century living tends to decrease the amount we produce in our cells and in our pineal gland. For example, poor sleep, which is a cornerstone of Alzheimer's disease. It's probably the single first indicator that someone is on the way to Alzheimer's disease is poor sleep. And you're going, oh no, I'm only 25 and I'm yep, well, guess what? Let's sort that out now, which is great. It's easy to do. So poor sleep, fluoride, which is a pineal poison and stops or slows down the production of melatonin. Other toxins, stress, blue light, and that's the light particularly from your mobile phones and so on. Lights in general around the home. We need sunlight. We don't need these artificial indoor lights. And having those late at night means you often have poor sleep, and as a result of that, it's a catch-22 and you have less melatonin production. So get rid of that blue light, your little devices that you're holding in front of your face before sleep, at least an hour or so before you sleep. Blue light, not enough daylight. We also know that daylight sets off melatonin in other parts of the body, e.g. the skin and some organs. And we also know daylight sets up the circadian rhythm for the greater release of melatonin at night. So that day-night exposure. And then finally, diet. You can get melatonin in lots and lots of foods. Unfortunately, processed foods don't have melatonin in it, nor the precursors to produce melatonin in your diet. So hence, going back to a healthy diet, you'd probably be aware that tart cherries have a high concentration, pistachios have a high concentration, nuts, seeds, and lots of other foods. And I'll have a video on food sources of melatonin as well to help you. A lot of parents tell me that with tart cherries, their children start to get tired. So it helps with that sleep cycle. Now, the problem we face is that melatonin production goes up. It starts at about 3-4 months. Hence, kids in those first few years don't get the melatonin, but first months, I should say, don't get that melatonin production. And it peaks at about 12, 13 years of age, then it starts to decline. And by the time you get to about 35, you're really at the bottom of your melatonin production, only a few percentage left, a small percentage left as a result of it. Now, unfortunately, that's probably when Alzheimer's starts to kick in as well, if you're going with my melatonin model. And of course, as it starts to decline, you're not showing the signs of it, but by the time you get to 80, you've got more than a 30% chance of developing Alzheimer's, along with all those other metabolic diseases and so on associated with melatonin. So what we find is when we got decreased melatonin, you find people have increased Alzheimer's disease. So it's a direct inverse correlation. Increased melatonin, decreased risk of Alzheimer's disease. So pretty says something there, doesn't it? And then you've got a decrease, which leads to a decrease in your sleep when you've got decreased melatonin. And as a result of the sleep and the melatonin, you've got the increased tau and the increased beta amyloid plaque. So we know the mechanisms, and we know melatonin plays a direct role. So what happens when we give it to the mice and rats? We've got a lot of thousands upon thousands of biochemical studies, cell studies, but when we come to the mice and rats, we see that it decreases the mitochondrial dysregulation. Remember that table I had up just a minute ago? Increases mitochondrial repair, so it fixes it up so it can function properly and easily and keep clearing it out. Decreases oxidative stress, decreases neuroinflammation. This is in both mice and rats in multiple studies, okay? Dozens upon dozens, maybe even hundreds of studies out there. It decreases the tau hyperphosphorylation, and these two, this one here and the amyloid plaque, decreases beta amyloid plaque, are the two physical parameters that they measure in the brain as a result of Alzheimer's disease. So we're halting those. It halts the beta amyloid accumulation as well, which, as Alzheimer's progresses, the greater accumulation of beta amyloid plaque, the greater the degree of Alzheimer's. It's a direct correlation. And when it comes to the studies, it also showed that the mice improved their learning and memory and other factors in there. I didn't want to go into them in detail, but all of them show some benefits. And these are studies that are usually done over weeks to probably a couple of months only. Now that does represent at least a couple of years for us anyway in the mouse, rat, human lifespan. When it comes to human studies, there are lots of human studies out there. Now, at this point, it's really worthwhile noting that melatonin is really critical for the embryonic brain. So the brain of the developing fetus, the mother's melatonin has a big role to play in it and in the differentiation and development of the various neurons that are going in the brain. So melatonin has a role in there. In humans, we know that it's critical for early development, particularly in children, hence that they're peaking at about 12 years of age, melatonin levels, because that's when they're peaking in their brain development and developing all of those critical neuronal connections. It's critical for neuroprotection and plasticity, and as I've already said, for those biological rhythms, which is why it's so important for young teenagers to make sure that they're off their phones and off all those things that literally the melatonin killers, so that they get their regular cycles, all cycles in the human body, controlled or at least influenced by melatonin. So we want to make sure it works effectively. Now, saying that, then we go to human trials. There are more than 50 human trials, random controlled trials, and these trials cost millions of dollars each one. So you can understand that some people out there, and melatonin isn't a money-producing pharmaceutical because it's extremely cheap to produce and there are no patents on it. So the studies typically go for 3 weeks to a year, 3 to 6 milligrams per day, and usually taken at night time, but sometimes during the day. Now, taking melatonin during the day doesn't make you drowsy and sleepy during the day. Melatonin just kicks in at night time. It kicks in the benefits of dark and night. So you can still take it during the day. Now, on the dosage here, it's important to remember that this is considered by the melatonin research as a relatively low dose. A recent paper in 2025 highlighted the fact that the actual clinical dosage to deal with all of these metabolic illnesses and conditions we're working on that melatonin functions with is probably going to be closer to 100 milligrams per day. And so there's lots of experiments going around, and by the way, that is considered extremely safe, which gets me to here. in the studies, and I'll highlight this in a moment too, it outperformed the general meds that they were using on Alzheimer's disease, and no side effects. Which, when you consider the side effects from the various medications, which cost a lot of money and are patented and people are making money, the only reason I am convinced that melatonin isn't being used widely in lots of conditions, but in Alzheimer's, is that it's cheap and the pharmaceutical companies really don't want you to know about it. In a study of identical twins with mild Alzheimer's disease, they used just 6 milligrams over 12 weeks. Now, 12 weeks is a pretty short period of time in Alzheimer's, when it probably takes decades in the progression of Alzheimer's to that final stage where we identify it. There was less progression in the melatonin twins. Those who got melatonin progressed with Alzheimer's conditions less, and there was increased impairment in the non-melatonin twins. Their dysfunction increased as a result of not taking melatonin. Pretty significant on that. And in a review of 11 studies with mild Alzheimer's disease, they found an improvement in the mini mind state examination, which is the examination that they use to evaluate how people think, feel, their memory, all their cognition and those aspects. And so there was an improvement in those who took melatonin. There was a decrease in the sleep latency, which is the period to get to sleep, and a decrease in the sleep to wakefulness transition, which is when you wake up in the morning, you actually wake up more alert. Interesting enough, isn't it? And then finally, a decrease in cognitive and memory impairment as a result of the Alzheimer's and the melatonin supplementation. Simple strategy, isn't it? Wow. And then when it comes to probably the biggest study that's been done, which was a meta-analysis, which in other words took all of the studies but only selected the top 10 clinical trials. So this is very, very precise, and had a total of 4,599 people with mild Alzheimer's disease. So again, a big and a very powerful and well-structured study. Melatonin outperformed and was more effective than all the other drugs that they compared it to. Pardon my pronunciation here, donanemab, lecanemab, aducanumab. These are the major drugs that they use with Alzheimer's, for Alzheimer's, and melatonin outperformed them and the placebo, and no side effects. The most significant side effect of all of these big studies that have been there is occasionally a headache or drowsiness, which is modified when they look at the dosage and so on. So pretty significant findings across the board. The literature there, the information is there, study on cells, rats and mice and humans are clearly saying if you want to prevent Alzheimer's. Now, melatonin is one strategy, but you've got gut and diet and lifestyle factors in it, which I'll cover in my other videos. But if you really want to prevent Alzheimer's, you really need to consider melatonin as a supplement. And if you have Alzheimer's, you think you have Alzheimer's, it's well worth considering as an initial treatment that you can start straight away. Unfortunately, the medical system isn't geared towards melatonin yet. Very few of the people trained in Alzheimer's disease know anything about melatonin, and they certainly don't promote it because, again, there is no money to be made in melatonin. It's extremely cheap. Now, on that topic, I have videos on melatonin, on detoxing, acid reflux, tooth decay, aging, polycystic ovarian syndrome, ladies, and osteoporosis, not to mention the other ones which will be going up. If you've enjoyed this information, where I combine dozens and dozens of studies, make sure you subscribe to my channel, tick the like box and share with your friends.